Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
Your glance at sex and social justice.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. We have a special episode for you this week. We are super excited to share it with you. Last weekend, we had the opportunity to go up to Brooklyn to cover an art show put on by sex workers and their allies at Lucas. We will bring you interviews and live footage from the event. We will first be talking to three of the curators and artists about the show, Mistress Sybil, Mistress Niko, and Caroline Caldwell. Next, we will bring you an interview with Slavid, one of the subs that participated in the event, about his experience. And lastly, we will talk to Stacie Lucas, owner of Lucas, about her reflections on the show. And in between all of that, we will share interviews and performances from the event.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special episode of the Peep Show podcast. We've got a pretty unique one for you today.
Yeah.
We haven't done anything like this so far in our, 22 episodes?
Yeah, this is our 22nd episode. Yeah, we've done other special events. I mean, we've gone to AVN and we went to Body Hacks and we've gone to Theorizing the Web, but those are all very conference-y, and this was not a conference. So what we went to instead was an art gallery put on by sex workers and their allies that included performance art pieces.
Yeah, there was a lot of performance and got up in there with the microphone.
Got up on the gallery floor.
Truth. Actually, the hardest part of this episode was trying to record a whipping because I really had to get my face in there and try to get the sound, but also not get whipped at the same time. It was a little scary.
You weren't that close.
Oh, speak for yourself. You were standing like 10 feet back in front of the speaker.
Yeah. That mistress was really good at whipping. That was quite a show.
She was good at whipping. She was also very good at consoling.
Yeah, she was. It was very sweet, actually.
In between the screams of pain, it was actually quite tender.
Yeah. So what happened at the show was put on, like I said, by sex workers and sex working artists who were all dominatrixes, and they had their subs with them or their colleague subs, and the subs stood in as props to hang the art.
Right. It was pretty interesting. And the subs also featured in the exhibit in a number of different ways. And so it was really a lived and performed art experience. But there was also more conventional photos and drawings and paintings hung on the wall as well. Mm-hmm. We happened to be in the vicinity of New York, and Stacie Lucas from the gallery
from Lucas, yeah,
contacted us and said, hey, we're having this event. I think it's a really great fit for your podcast, and the mission of the gallery and the event really aligns with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And maybe you'd be interested in coming out. And she even offered us a room to stay in above the gallery. And
yeah, she lives above the gallery, so that was really fun.
So we said, hey, why not? And it was really interesting. In addition to all that, we went to an after party at the Taillor Collective.
Taillor Group, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, which is a feminist collective of doms, of dominatrixes, and they have a space that they share that is also a dungeon that has several rooms that they take clients to, and that's where the after party was.
Both of those events were in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Definitely very interesting. We haven't covered power relationships or power exchange relationships or pro-dom issues.
A little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say a ton on the podcast.
Yeah.
So it's definitely cool to expand our coverage a little bit and tackle both sex work and sexuality from a different angle.
Yeah, one of the things that we got to do that I thought was really interesting and it's going to feature on this episode, was talk to one of the subs that was there working the event about his experience there and also his experience with his mistress. And that's super interesting because while we've talked to so many sex workers on this podcast, we've never talked to any clients.
Yeah.
This is going to be the first time that we feature a client, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, actually. And I think we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's really important to capture clients' voices. And I think it's like a really important political act for clients to speak up. And I think that goes a long way to combating stigma around sex work and sexuality more broadly.
Right. Yeah. So that was really remarkable. But there were so many remarkable things that happened during the show. I mean, one of the things that stood out the most to me was, or that I found particularly interesting, was Mistress Niko's performance, who was also one of the visual artists in the show, who did a striptease where she pulled down her own painting and ripped it up into pieces. And
yeah, it was a self-portrait. So she was actually cutting up the pieces of her body
and giving them to members of the audience who were tipping. And one of the things that she talked about was how selling works of art and selling her body through sex work are really similar experiences. And to watch that being played out was really, really profound.
Yeah, and more broadly, I think it was really interesting. The exhibit highlights just how many sex workers are also artists or engaged in these kind of creative endeavors. And I think it really points to the fact that doing this kind of work requires a certain type of creative energy, a certain type of creative personality. But the fact that there are so many sex workers who are also making art, I think really points to how much creativity is involved in sex work and how much both art and sex work are really intertwined in practice, as we know. Well.
And we actually, one of the first things we're going to bring to you is an interview with 3 of the curators, and they talk so eloquently about that relationship between art and sex work, and it was really moving to be around that sort of energy and passion.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good segue. Let's go ahead and jump right into the episode. We'll have the interview with the organizers here in a second. First, we're going to have Mistress Niko and Caroline Caldwell provide a description of the event and some of the performances that took place there.
Awesome.
You'd be coming into a gallery space. And it's a beautiful converted garage. And you would see works of art about sex work by sex workers and allies. And some of those works of art would be presented to you on the body of a submissive man. They might be hanging from nipple clamps. There might be a man tied up with rope across his chest, and there's a painting hanging from the rope, or he might be holding like a chain in his mouth that little Polaroids are dangling off of. And there would be other submissive men serving the wine. They would be holding your wine glass. There would be beautiful dominatrixes disciplining all of these men, making sure they're doing their jobs properly as objects.
The show itself is a performance, but we also had some burlesque performers. We had some artists who did live art creation that was also extremely intimate. Laura Duvall, Catherine Kane, Miss Sugar Mamasota. Tonight we have some of those again, and then we have St. Joan Taillor, who is going to be a beautiful sex robot.
Wow.
And Monica Rostfold, who gave a stellar performance. This was the one thing at the show that encouraged documentation. That was essentially her giving us a dance that I don't even know how to describe it. It was basically like anything that would usually be censored was the only things you could see during her dance, and everything else was censored.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Use your imagination.
Yeah.
It was great, though, and I'm really looking forward to the performances tonight.
So the first performance of the night is starting, and there's a sub on the ground on his hands and knees wearing lace panties, and there's somebody sitting on top of him holding an apple, and everybody's sitting in a semicircle around waiting to see what the doms are going to do with the sub that's on his hands and knees. And now she's dancing over his body, has placed the peach that she's half eaten in his hands, and has started a striptease. She's just pulled her leather belt off and laid it next to him, and is putting lipstick on. She's placing her shoes right next to his face. He looks a bit concerned. She's stripped the clothes off of him. Now he's just in his lace panties and is straddling him, putting her feet on his back.
We're here with Miss Sugar Mamasota, who just did a live performance for us here in the gallery. A striptease on a sub, I think. Do you want to explain your motivation behind the performance?
What I realized is when I dress like my regular self, when I'm out of character, people tend to treat me very differently and don't talk to me or something. And the minute you switch into some fantasy that people can easily recognize, oh, big hair and makeup, and like you're doing normal sexy stuff, and your hairy armpits are covered, then all of a sudden you get treated completely differently. So my whole performance is about like transitioning to more socially acceptable version of femininity.
Oh, interesting.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because you started in shorts and a t-shirt and tennis shoes.
I'm still the same person, but all of a sudden, like, I put on the shiny stuff and ooh.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks. We're at an art show, Blood Money, and we have the curators and a few of the artists here to talk to us about what the show is all about. So we are just going to let them introduce it.
You should tell them what's going on while we do this interview, because it's kind of hilarious.
So the show starts in half an hour, and they are putting their makeup on while we're talking at the apartment right above the show. So give us your name and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what the premise of the show is.
I'm Sybil Fury. I am a dominatrix based in New York, and the premise of the show is basically to invite viewers and participants into the world of sex work. We wanted to create an experience that allowed people to feel some of the interactions that we experienced in sex work by inviting real sex workers and clients and subs into the space, and to create the kind of interactions and exchanges that we go through every day.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So what are those interactions going to look like at the show?
So basically, some of our clients or friends' clients are going to be serving as objects that are mounting the furniture, that are mounting the artwork that's going to be displayed in the show.
Oh, wow.
So we're using bondage, clamps, and different positions to actually display the artwork on their bodies.
Wow.
And the ones that are not serving as furniture will be serving the female guests in attendance.
So is that considered performance art then, in the sense that you have, I guess, in the dynamic between you and your subs is sort of I didn't realize it was kind of a live performance that was going on, not just like pictures hanging on the wall.
We think of it as performance art in the way that sex work is like performance art. So the performance that's happening is, in a way, it's theater, but it's also very real because the clients actually enjoy the humiliation, the interactions with people looking at them and wondering what they're doing, the shame. So yeah, I guess in a way it's performance art in the same way that our sessions are.
My name is Mistress Niko. I am an artist, a dominatrix, a stripper. I've never said all of those three things together. But I guess that's what's happening at this show. Yeah, is that my sex work and artwork personas are being merged.
Mm-hmm. Is this the first time that those identities have been merged in this way?
Yeah. I had this art show happen, and I was doing sex work at the time. And I started thinking about how similar it was of an experience to like sell your body and to sell your art.
Yeah.
So in both of those experiences, you're selling like the most intimate part of yourself.
Yeah.
You're selling a fantasy of yourself for a price, you know? And it's really interesting to think about where the power lies in those exchanges, the performance of creating this person that is you but is more than you, and then to like try to weasel some of that cash out of their grubby little hands. So that's cool.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a certain element of exposure that, you know, is putting yourself out there, connecting up those different worlds in one event. How do you feel about it? Like, personally, what's going on for you as these two worlds are coming together?
So I guess I don't think I was able to be an artist in the world until I did sex work.
Yeah.
One of my pieces in the show is about that. It was really hard for me to think about the idea of basically selling my art because I really didn't want any part in the real world. I
get that.
Yeah, like my personality is I was a very shy kid, and so I just don't really like interacting with the world that much. But in sex work, it's a game, and it's a fun game, and a sexy game, and a dangerous game. And that taught me how to be a person in the world and to be an artist.
My name's Caroline Caldwell. I am one of the co-curators of Blood Money. I am part of the art world, I guess, in a less traditional sense. I grew up doing graffiti and street art. I relate to Niko's comment about discovering a sense of identity through finding a world outside of the structured world.
Yeah.
And for me, that was through graffiti and street art. So basically, Sybil and Niko are two of my very close friends, and we were out one day and they had approached me with this idea for a show and, you know, had told me so much about these incredible experiences that they had been having and how deeply intimate they were and moving and just the kinds of experiences that I guess make life exciting.
Yeah.
And they had said that they wanted to turn it into an art show, and I have a background in the art world, so I was just like, let's cook this up together.
Yeah.
And I hooked them up with a space with Stacie Lucas, who I had recently curated a show about a bunch of ad takeovers that I had done with my partner at the time. So like I had just had a show with Stacie about a street art project that I had done and approached her being like, hey, my two incredible friends have this idea of having a show that involves a sort of immersive experience with sex workers and with their clients and hanging art in that context by physically hanging them on the clients.
We were at an academic conference yesterday, and we were talking to a friend of ours who is not a sex worker, and she was asking me what client interactions were like. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about that is it was so much different than what she expected. And anyone who doesn't do the work, I think, is really shocked by what those experiences are like, that they are deeper and more interesting and more profound than I think a lot of people expect them to be. And so I love this idea of like showing people what those interactions look like.
Absolutely. And that's something that the three of us had talked about a lot as well. Specifically, I guess, the sort of outside notion of the relationship between sex workers. I guess we have all heard comments from men supposing that like women in this industry are catty with each other, or, you know, like just like supposing this sort of dramatic interaction when in reality it's one of the most loving bonds I think any of us have ever experienced, because, you know, working with people who are the most brave and vulnerable and intimate and strong and can do all of those things in a way that can also be deeply healing for another person. And I think all of those things absolutely feel related to the role of an artist as well, by being so brave and so strong and embracing the most vulnerable, intimate sides of yourself and doing that in a way that's also healing for others.
Right.
So it feels so related, and it felt like both shocking and so obvious at the same time to realize how many people in the sex work world, women specifically, are also artists and are also creative and incredible ones with work that just have the most powerful potent meaning behind it. Like, it's not just aesthetics. It just comes with this rich, deep vein of love and lust and desire and sadness and pain and vulnerability and honesty. And like, you can't fake that stuff.
Right.
That comes from having experiences like this. So yeah, having it put together in an art show, and in an art show that invited people who might not have had these experiences before to enter into that space, was such an exciting idea to me that I was so thrilled to help out.
So this is a question about the slaves. What was their response when you guys asked them if they wanted to participate in this show?
I think it was varied. I mean, obviously, this is a lot more public than a lot of people have been with their kinky identities specifically, since the slaves that we're asking are mostly from our pro-doming experience. But a lot of them were super excited about the opportunity to express some of the interactions that they've had with us to the rest of the world and to a broader public. I think a couple of them have seen this as an opportunity to really educate a broader public, not just about sex work, but also about DS relationships, about femdom, and to make people question maybe the power relationships that they think should and can exist in relationships between people.
Yeah. Do you think that some of them viewed that as a coming out?
Mrs. Sybil again. I actually don't think so. I think that the people that didn't want to come out did not participate, and the ones who did participate, for the most part, chose to be as anonymized as possible.
Okay.
We have full GIMP masks on everyone.
Okay.
And no phones or cameras are allowed in the space at all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The only people taking photographs are people that we know who are sex worker friendly and who are going to approve all of the photos after the event.
Okay.
To protect the identities of not just the slaves, but actually the sex workers as well.
Yeah.
Many of us who are not out to the rest of the world and have vanilla lives that would, unfortunately, due to rampant whorephobia and sex worker stigma, would be ruined by people finding out that you're a sex worker. So in that sense, actually, we've been able to protect the identities of a lot of the slaves we've invited into the space.
Nice. So this is the second day of the show. Tell me, Niko, how it went yesterday.
It was crazy. We had such a big turnout and such beautiful people came. Some of our mentors and idols, and it was beautiful. A lot of people in the community came, which were the people that we cared about. The performances, which we hadn't properly seen before, because their performances obviously went way better than I expected. They were beautiful. It seemed like people were really engaged.
This is Caroline. Yesterday was incredible. The turnout was so far beyond what any of us expected it to be, and for that I am deeply humbled. We had a line around the block outside of the gallery the entire night, to the point where I was just like, okay, we either have to have some of our doms start bullying people to leave, or, you know, what we ended up doing instead was having some of our doms walk some of our subs out on the street to hang with the crowd and
that's smart.
do
That's
a little,
awesome.
yeah. So we tried to work it outside a little bit, but also trying to be respectful of the neighbors.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was incredible. The performances, one of them by a performer named Catherine Kane, who's Residual Sadness on Instagram, she had a performance that was so intense that I started crying, which I've never cried watching like a 2-minute performance before, but the intensity of it, like I can't even explain. Like, I am not a crier.
Yeah.
That brought me to tears. Yeah, we had beautiful performances, but also I guess my friends who were coming more from the art world and less from the sex work world or kink world were just completely blown away. And the comments that I had gotten, I'm just, like I guess before the show I didn't really know, there was so much left up to how things played out naturally and organically that we could not have possibly planned, that before the show it's just like, I don't really know what this is going to look like. It really depends on the audience and that interaction. It depends on
How they take it up.
How they take it. For some people, maybe this is going to be a really radical experience that inspires them to get more involved with like maybe aspects of themselves that they hadn't explored yet until they saw somebody else doing it. Maybe for some people it was cringeworthy. I hope we made some people cringe. If not, we failed. But it's because so much of this line of work has to do with fear and pain as much as it has to do with pleasure. And that's just any part of like a intimate, vulnerable experience is the possibility and of submitting yourself to the possibility of being deeply hurt. So I guess I'm just saying that to say, like, we didn't really know in advance how it was going to go. So I'm so humbled by the fact that it was incredible, and that I've been getting messages all day from people being like, I can't believe what I saw. That was crazy. And yeah, we'll see how tonight goes as well. I'm not really sure. Hopefully it's equally exciting.
Just thought that was a really interesting point about vulnerability and the way that all comes together, both in like intimate relationships, but then in the context of art and in the context of BDSM, just kind of the way that that kind of vulnerability converges in all those contexts, I thought was really neat, kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, it also makes me feel so incredibly, incredibly grateful for all of the doms and subs and sex workers who were part of the show. Having people who were willing to be so open with something that is very vulnerable and typically very private, and sharing that with strangers is the most incredible, magic, trusting experience. So that was what made the show special.
The doms that were involved and their slaves were the ones that made the show happen, like physically, even down to the point of like running out to the store to get magic eraser, which, you know, is like the thing that you need the most in the last minute, you know. But
I learned
like
something new.
But Mistress Shayla, Lady Alice Blackwell, Mistress Nina DeVille, and the Taillors. The Taillors group is a group of doms in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
And everyone is a bad bitch. And yeah, their power made this possible.
Some of the Taillors are artists in the show. Eva is an incredible photographer. Her photos make me shiver. And so she's part of the Taillor group, and the Taillor group is also hosting an after party for us. So we are so thankful to them and all that they do creatively and all of the labor that they put into the show as well. And a massive thank you to Stacie Lucas for letting us host our show at Lucas, her gallery, and just for letting us do a show that most galleries would have laughed at if I approached them with this idea. Not many people would have said yes to this, and it was so amazing that she was not only down, but down for the weirdest questions I've ever asked a gallerist. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I asked her, I'm like, are we allowed to do this? And she was like, yeah, do it, go for it. So
what questions?
Like degrees of nudity and what is done with those naked bodies, and how much we can offend her neighbors. Like,
she was really amazing though, because she reached out to us and said that she so believes in this show that she wants it to get beyond just the people who are in Brooklyn and who are capable of coming to the show, which is why we're here now, because we can push it beyond just the people who are here.
If people are interested in learning more about the show, where can they find information?
So on our Instagrams, Mistress_Sybil, Mistress Niko, Niko's with a K, and I'm Dirt Worship. This is Caroline speaking. Dirt Worship, all one word.
Great. Thanks for joining us and for sharing with our listeners about the show.
Thank you so much for coming. We would love to thank Lovelorn Lingerie, who dressed some of our doms in the most incredible, unique harnesses I've ever seen. She is fantastic. Look her up, Lovelorn Lingerie. And
Lovelorn, L-O-R-N?
Lovelorn, yes. L-O-R-N.
Okay.
And a few of our other vendors, so Independent Thought and Lily MTS and Bound Leather are amazing.
So we're about to watch a performance of Mistress Niko. She is wearing a black lacy outfit.
She has a razor blade or something in her G-string.
She does have a razor blade in her G-string. She's an artist here as well. She just cut up the piece that she made for exhibit and licked parts of it. And she's taking it now and she's rubbing it on her crotch. People in the audience are tipping her. She's going around giving everyone who's giving her tips a little piece of her painting. Should also say that her painting is of her own body that she's pulling apart and giving to everybody in the crowd in pieces. We just watched your performance, and you took one of your own paintings and ripped it up and dispersed it to the crowd. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
I just feel really weird about selling my art. I remember the first time someone was like, so yeah, how much is this piece going to sell for? And I was like, this is a piece of my soul. I don't want anyone to pay for it. I also don't want to sell it. But if you really love it, I guess you can have it. Like, what price is that? So the performance is about selling your body, as in stripping, being similar to selling your art.
Yeah.
And I like the feeling that you get when you're on stage and you're stripping and you're trying to seduce the audience to make the money come onto you.
Sorry, we're being interrupted by a spanking at the moment.
Now apologize to these nice people. Stand up straight. Hold this up. Hold this up.
I'm so sorry. Okay. But it's also like it's an amazing experience being on stage, trying to seduce people, trying to make the money come from your sex power. But it also drains you emotionally, physically, sexually.
Right.
So I wanted just to compare that to the experience of selling your art.
I thought it was particularly interesting that you ripped parts of your body and handed them out to different people.
Yeah, I didn't prepare for this piece at all. But when I got to the part where I was about to cut up my pussy, I was just like, see what I'm doing here? I'm cutting up my pussy.
It was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We are here with Slavid. Slavid is a 46-year-old male submissive living in Brooklyn. His fetish-related interest includes service, financial domination, and all kinds of humiliation. He is happily owned by Mistress Alice. So welcome, Slavid. Thanks for chatting with us.
Thanks for having me on.
We met you at the event last weekend. The way that we met you is that you were serving as the guest book. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a fun experience. The mistresses in charge of the show were looking for other ways that I might be able to serve, and I actually suggested that I could serve that way. People were able to write on me with Sharpie or other implements to give their comments on the show or just in general comments, and it was a very fun sort of humiliating experience, which is something I enjoy, but also, I felt kind of very well cared for, and it was a fun experience.
Oh, that's cool. I actually didn't know that was your idea. So tell me a little bit about how you are involved with the people who ran the show.
I didn't previously know the mistresses who were most directly involved in running the show, but the mistress I personally serve, I knew them and suggested that I be involved in the show.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to be owned by Mistress Alice and how long you've had that relationship with her?
Yeah, that's been going on for about a year and a half, and it's evolved over time. It's a close relationship, a lot of service. I do things like clean her apartment and help her with things. There is a financial component. We've got to the stage where I essentially give my paycheck to her control, and I get an allowance from her from that amount.
Oh, wow. And you give her your whole paycheck?
Yes, and it does. Some of it sort of stays in a joint account where then she takes a certain amount per week, and so there's some kind of reserve for depending on what we need. But yes, essentially that is controlled by her, and that's a sort of a new step for me in terms of these relationships over time. But it's something that I have been enjoying, absolutely, and I I've kind of picked the right person because it's all worked extremely well, and it's kind of a very intense feeling.
I'm really curious about that. What attracted you to this kind of relationship, and how did that get started for you?
It's been an interest of mine, certainly on and off for quite some time in conjunction with other kind of submissive interests. With that one particularly, I'm not quite sure of its origin, why, I find financial submission particularly erotic. It's not uncommon of a fetish.
Right,
I mean, it certainly exists, and I sort of experimented it with even on kind of online or webcam things of people over time, but this is the most sustained and in that way most rewarding because it's much more personal relationship. One, though, that in some ways is also the least socially acceptable because I feel like if you're interested in bondage or something like that, it's kind of much more socially acceptable, whereas financial somehow a little raises some eyebrows, I think.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually. I never quite thought of it that way. The bondage stuff is very physical, whereas the financial domination is more psychological, but also, I guess, has a real impact on your life. So it's a pretty big commitment.
Yes, no, that's true. And I definitely tend to be more interested in the psychological side of things, not just financially, but humiliation or, kind of aspects of control that tend to be more psychological than purely physical, or certainly than are, for example, masochistic, on a physical level. But in terms of the lifestyle and the effect on life, I agree that sort of as a sustained thing does have some impact. And I think sometimes people who play in that area, it's more of a short-term burst of release and then withdrawal, or then moving on. I've found at least Aero kind of sustainably enjoyable.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we talked about this a little bit at the party, but I work on Night Flirt, and what you get on Night Flirt, because there's a lot of financial domination that goes on there, is, you're right, much more short term. I want to call and I want you to double your rates, or I want to tribute you so much money. But those are for one or a few interactions. They're not this sustained long relationship.
Yeah, and I've been there in the past and done that, and I've enjoyed that too. And it's interesting now that it's such almost a regular thing. I don't almost have that immediate release, here's X dollars, because it's almost this, automatic thing that happens. But on the other hand, on a deeper level, I'm able to enjoy it on this more continuing, more escalated level. And of course, the woman I serve, she's professional dominatrix. Actually, she does fairly well financially, so I also feel like I'm not the sole support. And
so it's interesting, I was just thinking about this. Those sort of interactions that you have with her then are more private, and what you did at the event was a very public thing. Was that different for you?
I certainly have tended to, do my kind of fetish-oriented things generally more privately, or at least haven't been as actively involved in the sort of scene of people who do BDSM clubs on a regular basis. However, with Mistress Alice, we do lots of other things and a lot of kind of playful domination, humiliation, submission, and some of that occurs in public. So there's some, but not in such a necessarily formal setting, but, at a club or at some event, we might go together and might be involved in some kind of playful domination or humiliation in the context, even in a sort of non-fetish space. So there's some experience with that, but that was the first time I had ever done, kind of more formally as a slave, probably in that kind of a public context. And certainly this is my first podcast interview.
Yeah. Was it a good experience for you to be, you said that you felt well cared for there.
Absolutely. The people in charge, I absolutely did. And I very much enjoyed doing that. I do think that's a humiliation, but you might find sort of an attention-seeking person, and I kind of felt like by being the guest book, that would probably function on some level. That I enjoyed it for that reason as well. But it was a fun night, and actually 2 nights the prior night, I just sort of served as a slave, helped set up, and served some drinks, did some things of that nature.
Yeah. So you also write about your experiences as a submissive.
Well behind on what I'd like to do, and when I get more time, would like to keep up with more, but I do keep a blog of some of my experiences, which is woefully out of date. blogger at Velvet Slave, and Instagram that has short, mostly pictures of things, which is slavid.nyc. Unfortunately, I have a fairly busy vanilla job, but I have aspirations. And Mistress Alice, one of the things is we also hope for her guidance and control to sort of be in some self-improving ways and improve me to spend more time on some creative projects, things like that. And I would like to write more about my experiences and more about some of the thoughts and the things that have led me there to that. So I hope to spend more time on that in the months to come and produce some things along those lines.
I think that's all really interesting, and definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and giving us the submissive perspective on this whole event.
Well, no, I mean, it was a fun event, and I loved a lot of the art, and I was really, wanted to support this fund that helps sex workers. Sort of an important person in my life is now a sex worker, and that's something I feel strongly about, especially after Sesta and Fausta, to support them. So it was a good experience.
We have this podcast, and we focus mostly on sex workers, and it's super interesting. And one of the things I think I wanted to do is to bring in more of the perspective of clients and people who love sex workers and people who support them. And so it's
family
really
members and
what's that? And family members. Yeah.
People who are adjacent in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. So it's really nice to hear that support.
Thank you for having me, and it's been an absolutely great year and a half with Mistress Alice and I. And this is just one additional thing that I was lucky to be involved with.
I'm going to be doing my performance piece called Sex Robot with a Glitch. So thank you. Hello, I am your new Pussy Aider 3000. You can see you got the real deal. Yes. Yes. I know what you need. I know what you want. I know that you want to mansplain me. I'm gonna make you a wet, hot chicken dinner. Oh, I've got to sharpen my knife. Yes. 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 Just how I like it. Steel on steel. We made nuggets.
So we're here with St. Joan, and we just saw her performance, and we wanted to ask what your inspiration was here.
Howdy, this is St. Joan Taillor. So my performance is entitled Sex Robot with a Glitch. So my kind of inspiration was autobiographical in that I work in the sex industry. I'm a very sexually liberated person. I've worked as a dominatrix and as a professional swinger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I have a lot of experience in this realm, and sometimes I'll find myself thinking to myself, like, isn't that funny? Like a kind of a glitch in the Matrix type of a feeling. So I think to myself, oh, wow, like, how am I so blessed to have this life? How am I so blessed to have such a supportive community in the sex industry? And also considering the prevalence of mental health issues in the sex worker industry, not only stemming from trauma at work, but also just it's a really supportive and safe environment if you have the right community. And so I thought to myself, oh, you know what? I'm like a sex robot with a glitch.
How does professional swinging work?
It's a wild ride.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. I'm curious. Tell us a bit about it.
Well, not every swingers club has this. Not every adult entertainment club has this. So my technical job title was a, quote, undercover swinger. So I just pretended to be a normal femme attendee of these swingers parties, and it was amazing. It was like the best acting role of my life because I just played myself. I used my real name. I told people, oh, my boyfriend lives in California. Where does that leave me here in NYC? High and dry. Hi, nice to meet you. You want to go in the back? So my role was also to kind of seek out people who look particularly shy, especially if it is obvious it's their first time there. And I can single them out and talk to them, make them feel a little bit more comfortable, and help them warm up in the space so that maybe they can go have an interaction on their own with someone else.
I know this is like a huge movie, but have you seen the new Blade Runner? The performance kind of reminded me of that.
Thank you so much. I love Blade Runner. I my screensaver on my computer is "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" It's
the original book, right?
Well, that's the title of the book, but there's also a computer program that's a screensaver that plays the same fractal in real time on every program that has it downloaded. So when your computer is asleep and the screen is displaying the visual, every person who has the program downloaded is seeing the same exact visuals as you are at the same time. I'm also very inspired by 7 of 9 from Star Trek. Yeah.
I'm always happy to have a sideways hook into Star Trek.
I love it. Can't get enough. Sir Jean-Luc Picard, you're my hero. It was very nice meeting you both. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for chatting with us.
All right, we are here with Stacie Lucas, who's the owner of Lucas in Brooklyn, an inclusive art gallery and ethical concept. So, hi, Stacie.
Hello, guys. Good morning.
Good morning. You were the host of the Blood Money show last weekend and invited us up, and we wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about your art gallery.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a really eye-opening weekend for me, for sure. I opened up Lucas pretty much in the name of wanting to share messaging that maybe many folks hadn't received before, but positive messaging. So the idea is people come here for a variety of shows, of art shows or events or gatherings, and they learn something new. Maybe they meet someone that they typically wouldn't have had a conversation with, and take those experiences out into the world and do something beyond. Yeah.
That's super interesting because I feel like the Blood Money exhibit was a really good example of that because all of the curators of that particular show wanted to show people what their relationships were like with their clients and extend those beyond those sort of private interactions.
Yeah. And, I feel super grateful to have been so close to these 3 women during this whole planning process. I have to say I'm newer to the world of BDSM. If you couldn't tell. But I had worked with Caroline Caldwell before on another project she did, Art in Ad Places, and that was a super successful event. Caroline approached me, which I was super flattered by, to say that she and a couple of her friends wanted to put together this group show by sex workers and allies to draw attention to certain issues that sex workers face.
Yeah.
And also to, of course, raise money for Lysistrata, which is an awesome organization. And, those are just 2 great reasons to have had the show. So she told me about their concept with subs holding, kind of interacting with the artwork and showing the work in a way that's very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It was really interesting. But one of the things, just to back up a little bit, I think it's interesting to talk to you because you aren't somebody like
Exactly.
you have an art gallery and not all of your shows are about sex work.
Right.
And so this is something that's really different from what you typically do there.
I've learned I'm putting myself also in new situations. It's not just about me choosing the situations, which was a big part of the reason I wanted to do it. I wanted to also be able to step out of my comfort zone. I feel I learned a ton.
So what was that experience like for you when your space turned into a dungeon?
It did turn into a dungeon. Well, when I'm
and I should say your gallery is in a residential area too. So
Millie across the street, she's the one that I wish I had been concerned with. I just have a very vivid picture of her turning the corner. You know, I put curtains up, but the curtains were not up yet. And I saw her turn the corner. It will forever be ingrained in my mind. But actually, I spoke with Millie afterwards, and she was like, you know what? You had art up. As long as you're doing good things, you're selling art, that's great. So she actually was way more open than I expected. And yeah, you're right. It's a residential area, and we hadn't done any sort of experience like this before, offered an experience, but it was incredible to see the faces of the people that came in. And I don't know who had or hadn't experienced this sort of spectacle, which it was,
right.
But it was really cool to see what I took as just, people maybe that had heard about it, that hadn't ever been involved, that were so excited about what was going on inside. And the DOMs were great. They would entertain the line that was around the corner.
It was really packed, and there were lines. And that was one of the funny aspects, though, is that they were also entertaining folks in line and bringing their
subs outside.
Yeah.
And so that, when we're talking about it being in a residential area, I think that, for folks who maybe weren't able to see it firsthand, that's what made it, I think, really interesting and provocative.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And potentially curious to the other folks living there.
Yeah. I mean, people were definitely curious and excited. Everyone just entertained, or they were a part of something.
One of the things I thought was really neat about the show is that a lot of folks maybe they aren't into kink or BDSM, or maybe they don't know any sex workers, or at least don't know that they know any sex workers.
Yeah, it's more likely they don't know that they know any sex workers.
But that they're in some way not keyed into this world, maybe have never entered a dungeon or would be afraid to step into that world. But this kind of was an opportunity for people to dip their toes into this world in kind of a very safe way. It was sort of pop-up dungeon, in a way, but I think it made people feel really safe to encounter these spaces.
Yeah, and everyone was so respectful, and you're right. I'm glad that you felt that way, because that's definitely what we tried to accomplish, is, especially also for the subs and the DOMs, you're showing yourself here in a pretty public space where anyone could just come in.
Did you find anything about the event particularly surprising? Was there anything that stood out to you that you kind of learned?
The biggest thing I've learned, and I didn't know anything about the sex working community, is just how professional everyone was at all points of planning and production. And this is a big business. And so obviously you must be professional. And it's this interesting world where it's fantasy, and that's what you're buying into. That's what you're participating in. But it's quite serious.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think that there's a lot of perceptions about who sex workers are, and a lot of that is based on like the fantasy persona. But in order to run a business like that, you have to actually be very together
and smart and on top of things. And it's not just about the one experience, it's an actual business that you're running. It was great to just be around these women that were just so badass. So badass.
Yeah. Well, we would really like to thank you for having us up. It was a really good experience for us too.
And thank you guys. This is a once in a lifetime thing for the way that it went down. I really feel very happy about everything. And we raised, I think, just over $1,000 for Lysistrata. Did great stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. What do you have on the horizon for your gallery?
So we have an opening this Thursday, the 23rd, called You Look Good, Ugly. And it's an artist duo. They are exploring matters of love, sex, lust, envy, social anxieties, and living in the digital era. And then we actually have Jana Teuber, one of our artists from Blood Money, is curating a group show called Ophelia.
Where can people find information about upcoming events?
So I have a website, lucasnyc.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter. You'll be prompted when you go to the site. That is probably the best way to learn about future shows, but also Instagram at lucasnyc.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.